So let's talk about military sexual assault, because there was supposed to be a vote this week, and now obviously this has changed the timing on that. Do you think the additional time frame, does that give you more of an opportunity to get more votes, or are you concerned that that may make your job a little harder in getting enough votes?
No, I think it gives me more of an opportunity to get more votes. We're not yet at 60. We're getting closer every day. A number of my colleagues announced their support last week and this week. Senator Harry Reid coming out in favor, additional Republicans, Senator Heller coming out in favor, Cory Booker. We're really beginning to develop a chorus of growing support amongst senators, but also military leaders. We have had a letter published of some of the highest ranking generals and officers within the military supporting this reform, because they've been working on this for decades and it hasn't been fixed. And they believe this large-scale structural reform, where you're actually putting objective, trained military prosecutors in charge of this one decision-making point, whether or not to go to trial, will make the difference, creating the transparency and accountability that's lacking today.
So there was a case that I was interested in back in June. There was a two-star commanding general of U.S. Army forces in Japan. He was up for a major promotion and actually ended up being suspended because he failed to properly report or investigate an allegation of sexual assault. And at the time, the intimation was that would have tarnished his record. He was up for a big promotion, which seems to me to be exactly at the heart of what you're talking about with your amendment. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's what the victims have told us over and over again across the board. There were 26,000 sexual assaults, rapes, and unwanted sexual contacts last year alone. But sadly, only 3,000 victims reported, because the vast majority, 23,000, said they didn't believe their command would do anything. That's the number one reason they gave. They didn't believe anything would be done. They also feared or witnessed retaliation within the ranks for those who reported. And what we know is those who did report, 62% were retaliated against.
Right.
So if you are raped in the military and you report that rape, you will likely be retaliated against for reporting that crime.
Does it also suggest, though, that within the Army, within the military, there is still kind of a rape culture that is a little bit like the 1950s, or this idea if there's a legitimate rape, or sort of not really trusting the victim when she says he says they were raped?
There's a couple of things going on. You have a vast misunderstanding of the crime of rape. You've had members of the military, senior officers say, oh, this is just because of the hookup culture. We've heard members of Congress talk about hormones. Rape is a crime of violence. It is a crime of dominance. It is not even a crime of romance or sex. In most cases, it's usually about dominance and power. The second issue we have is that the decision maker may well be biased. If the decision maker knows the victim or knows the perpetrator, or has a reason to shove it under the rug to make sure no one knows about the rape because it makes them look bad, that bias is undermining reporting. Because what victims have told us, when I told my commander, he said, it's your own fault. I'm not going to do anything.
One of the things that struck me is there's this image of you and Senator Rand Paul listening to testimony from one of the victims, and I've actually heard her speak, and it's heart-wrenching. And I'm wondering if that is the thing that really turns people in terms of listening to the real experiences that people have, and not just, it's one thing to look at the data and the facts and the generals and, that picture of all those, generals sitting there trying to defend their position. But when you really take it down to the level of a human being, it's a totally different conversation.
And that's exactly what motivated me to do something about this issue. When I heard the stories of men and women who are so brave, who will literally give their lives for our country, to be not only brutally assaulted and raped, but then to have their commander turn their back on them. That was the violation of trust. That was the breach of trust that devastates these men and women, because they look at the military not just as a career, but as a family, as a unit, as a group of people that they all share the same mission to defend this country and defend our values. And when that is breached because a commander says to you that it's your own fault that you were raped, it's destroyed. And that breach of trust is why justice is impossible for so many of our survivors.
One of the things I've heard you talk about is how just having women at the table in some of these conversations literally means you might think of something when you're discussing a piece of legislation that the men it would not occur to them.
Right.
And that's how positive change is actually being made with women in the Senate.
Well, I agree with you. I think with the fact that we have 20 women in the Senate, 7 on the Armed Services Committee, has transformed this issue of sexual assault in the military. Every woman senator has authored part of the reforms that have already been passed through the committee into the base bill. Every woman in the Senate feels passionately about this and is working hard to end sexual assault in the military. And together we've elevated the issue. We actually are, it is a #1 national issue across the country. So women's voices matter. And that's why I spend so much of my time politically asking women to participate, asking them to vote, to be advocates, regardless of political party, and then help women get elected, because women do bring that sensibility, that life experience, that extra emotional intelligence to an issue where they may see a different aspect of the problem, but also a different part of the solution. And that combination of male and female voices reaches the right result. I think women by nature are more often than not consensus builders. We like to listen to all different views and then find where that common ground exists. And in a place as broken as the U.S. Senate, that really makes a difference.